We are live. It is I don't know, 7 later than 7 somehow. I just got back from the dyno, or not for the dyno, but from West Tech, where I was assembling the L78 396 402. It's a 30 over, and not without trials and tribulations. I had to get another set of rings for it, which I did. And the nice thing is that they were already they were actually already at the gap that they needed to be. I didn't even have to gap them. So I had to pull off all of the ones that I gapped because they were too big. The oil rings were too big. They didn't want to go. They didn't want to go in the bores. And it's always these kinds of things. So, but finally got the short block all assembled. Got the pistons in. Everything seems to be spinning the way that it's supposed to. I liked while I'm assembling it. When I first put the crank in, what I do is I like spinning the crank each time I start tightening the mains down, as I keep alternating and tightening them to different levels, I keep spinning the crank just to make sure that, nothing's changing, that there's no drag, that there are no problems. And then that way, if it does bind up or if there does feel like there's drag or some kind of problem, um, we kind of know which one, we know where to look. But we didn't see any of that. There are some pits in this crank that I was a little bit worried about. I talked to Brule about it. He said, well, they're all under the surface and this crank has been polished. So they didn't seem to be creating any issue on the bearings, because we put it together a couple of times and spun it, and I had to add a little bit more thrust clearance to it. When we're doing the thrust, we hammer the front and the back of the crank to get the thing seated while we're tightening these things down. And then we measure it. And for Brule and I, one of the things that we like to do is we like to put the screwdrivers in there, move it back and forth, and then we try to guesstimate what it is. And he was right on. He said, nah, that one seems like a little tight. Seems like it's about 3. And so I hooked the dial indicator up and everything, and sure enough, it was spot on at 3. So I did a little bit the Super Richie bearing modifications, basically sanding the thrust surfaces on I use sandpaper, and then we pour oil on the sandpaper, and then have the sandpaper on a flat surface, so that when you're not pushing that hard, but so that when you're taking material off with the oil, you're taking a little bit off at a time, and you do it several times, just like when you're filing rings. You file rings, then we check it, and then you file the rings, then you check it, and you file the rings. And then I did that on the bearings. We sanded it a few times and then got it right in, and then I think it's about I don't know, it's about 5.5 or something right now, because I wanted to make sure that this thing could go in a stick car, and that's 5.5 or 6 is where we like it to be for a stick. For an automatic, you can get away with less, but that's kind of where I like it to be. So that's all together. I wrote myself a note to make sure I haven't. I've just tightened all the rods. I haven't torqued them yet. I have torqued the crank, and I have put the heads on and torqued the heads. So now, like I said, I wanted to make sure I left myself a note. I just didn't spin it over yet, back over. But everything, I snug everything again, just like with the crank. When we're spinning that, make sure it spins. When I put each rod in, I'm checking 2 things. One, I want to make sure that the big end of the rod down where the bearing is, that's not draggy or bound up in any way, and none of this seemed like it was. And then also you're kind of checking the ring drag, basically, is what I like to do. So you're feeling it, and just make sure that as you put each one in, that it kind of goes up the same amount. And also that when you're rotating it, after you put each piston in, you tighten the rod down. When you put it in and you're rotating it, that you don't get one that's stuck somewhere in the bore. We obviously, before we put these in, you got to go through a whole procedure when you're doing this. So we put all the rings in. I like to oil the whole piston. And I don't mean that I dunk it in oil. I just mean that I wipe the whole piston and all the rings with oil, and then we use a Total Seal ring installer that's adjustable through a various range. It's really nice. It's like a tapered cone, and then it that way the putting them in just is real easy, especially after it's set up for the right bore size. It just goes right in, and that's really nice. But I oil the inside of that, oil the piston. I even like to put some oil in each of the ring grooves, and I spin the rings around before we locate them. Although, a lot of guys say, "Well, you got to locate the rings, otherwise they'll line up and they'll be on the thrust side or whatever." They just spin, so that's not really an issue. I like putting oil in there and spinning the rings around just because I don't like that stuff to be dry. I'd rather have it be, lubricated when it all goes together. And then I make sure to put a little bit of oil on the rod bolts, the threads, and then put the little sleeves on them. And then we put them in. You don't have to worry about hitting the crank, and it kind of guides it into place. You put that in there. Make sure that while you're tapping it with the mallet, I use the wooden handle of a mallet. You can also use a plastic one, that works too. And drive it down in and seat it on the crank, and then put the cap on, and then make sure you're lining the cap up. On this, all of the caps are numbered for which piston went in which hole, and then you can see the number on the outside. That way you put it in right. That way the piston's in right. And then the same thing with the head. The one issue I had with the head is we don't have the exact gasket that I want. We have one that's thin enough. It's a 41 thousandths thick, but the bore size is a little bit too big. So I want to get it together and get it running, and I'll probably address that later on. I have ARP studs coming, or head bolts coming for it. I don't have those on good enough for what we're doing. And then you go through and you torque those in a couple of sequences. I like to snug everything down, tighten it up. I tighten it up once with the 1/2-inch ratchet, and then I go through and start at 50, and then these went to 75, I think. The intake manifold in the photo is sitting there, but it's not installed yet because I haven't put the cam in yet. The cam is going in as soon as I get done with this. The cam will go in tonight, the cam and the lifters, and then at least one lifter is going in tonight because I need to measure, or two. I need to measure push rod lengths to make sure that we have the push rods. So we will do that. I think I have a set of adjustable guide plates for it. So some darts or some AFRs or something, which will be, super fancy. It won't do anything other than, take more time to put on, basically, because we have to locate everything. But at least it'll give us a good rocker contact pattern on the valve tip, which would be good. And then the intake manifold is the right intake manifold for this. I need to try to source for the 454 for the LS6. I actually need to try to source the low profile manifold for the 454 because I want to run the right one on there because it's right for that, for the Chevelle. And I want to see what's going to happen. I want to see how much power that's worth. So it'll be interesting to see. We talked a little bit about it last night and the thing I'm curious about is the 454 and the 396, and then the 427 too, the L72, all different displacements, much like the small block deal that I ran, where I ran a 302 and a 327 and a 350. We need a poll there so you guys can chat it up. Okay, will the L78 make noise before I leave to go back home? will I actually get it running and make noise with it? See what people think. But we were discussing the fact that I ran the 327, 302, and 350, and the difference with those is that the 302 and the 327 both had the same cam. They both had effectively the same heads and the same intake manifold. We obviously ran up the same headers and all that stuff. And what we saw is they made similar peak power numbers, but the bigger displacement motor just made much more average power. Then the 350 made about the same peak power, but it had a smaller cam and then made a lot more average power. So it did kind of what we expected. I'm curious to see what happens between. I'm not going to run a 427 and L72 as much as I would love to, but between the 396 and the 454, same heads, same cam, same compression. The intake manifold might be a little bit different, like I said. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them. I don't know on those. The thing about the big blocks is that they have more they're not. I don't think that they're nearly as limited by head flow as the small blocks were. So it'll be interesting to see if, like we saw with the small blocks, are these big blocks going to basically make the same power, and then the bigger one have more torque? I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the bigger motor, in this case, because it has enough head flow to deal with, I think that the big block, I think a 454 is going to make a lot more power than a 396. I think a 454 would make more power than a 427 too, because they have enough camshaft, they have enough compression, they have enough displacement, and they have enough cylinder head. The only thing I don't know about is I don't know how limiting that intake manifold is on the LS6 compared to the others. So, like I said, that's why we test. It'll be an interesting deal. I'm kind of excited about finding out. I'm curious mostly to see. We want to see what they make in terms of, peak power and peak torque or whatever versus what they're rated at, and then if I can find stock exhaust manifolds to run versus headers, all of that's going to be gravy. But I'm curious to see where the 396 makes peak power relative to the 454. The 454 is definitely going to make peak power at a lower engine speed. I just want to see how much of a difference it's going to be. It'll be it'll be kind of an interesting deal. So I'm excited about getting back down there and getting the camshaft in. I'm going to run a solid flat tappet, but it's not the stock one yet because I don't have that yet from Elgin. So we're going to run an upgraded version from Comp, an upgraded solid lifter version from Comp, which will be cool. So we're at 88% saying yes. Let's see who's here. Can you please do an episode on dynamic compression for NA and pump gas? The only way to determine the correlation between dynamic compression and pump gas, are you wanting to find out what you can get away with versus different octanes? Because dynamic compression is not the only thing that determines what you can get away with. Procharge Mopar, setup fab went to gap at 200,000 mile Magnum, and they were already at 32. Does a Magnum might be that old school block for a Magnum might still wear like the if the gap is 32, I want to know what the ridge is at the top of that bore. If they're telling me that the gap is 32 and that there's no ridge at the top of the bore, then somebody did something to the rings. One-legged wheelie. Can you explain this throttle body vacuum line in the boosted? I don't have a picture, so it'd be kind of hard for me to do it. Get away, you're resting. 18726543 LS firing order, or an altered Chevy, small block Chevy. Turbo Sentra, they started on my cams. Stock was 176, and they said 200 at 50 might be possible. So they're regrinding your stock cams. Is that what they're doing? That would be a big change. I don't know if that's enough for what you're trying to do. Come on, I don't want to see that. There we go. Now I get rid of it. Did you test the Skyram and post the test results? I didn't. I wasn't allowed to test the Skyram. The guys from West Tech did, though. Good run ratio for an 87 SVO Mustang. A 373 or a 410, probably. Mario, there's no topic for tonight. We just have a topic that I talk about, but everybody can talk about anything that they want. And on your 408, I don't. Inverter is going to be a function of your camshaft and your power output and your weight and your gearing and your transmission and all that stuff. I did not find a carb. We're going to run the carburetors that we have here. He said it had some ridge. Yeah, it definitely would have. It would have had ridge like the like not like the trophy 4-cylinder because that had a ton. What dynamic compression and quench can you put on pump gas on LS? I want to run 9-to-1 dynamic compression and a 35 quench. Why are you concerned about those two things? Why don't you ask how do I make lots of power, and then we'll answer that. 11 Bravo. Yeah, this does have closed chamber heads on the L78. Ford 460 is a cannon valve, right? Just like a Cleveland and a Chevy, a big block Chevy, not a small block Chevy. Vortec 4200. What engine management do you recommend? The only one I've ever run with that is the MS3 Pro. This cam is the comp. I can't remember the part number, but it's about 600 lift, and it's not their replacement for the L78 and the it's the upgrade for that. It's not the replacement for the not the L88 for the L78 and the LS6 and the L72. It's not their replacement cam, which is probably a little bit better than the stock one already. This is the performance upgrade version of that. It's a solid flat tappet. I'll tomorrow I'll make sure I have the specs. One more week, I'm starting my LA3 cam swap. Cool. I don't know about the cheapest ECU that somebody can use. Do we have any blow through E85 carburetors at Westech? I don't know. I have to check and see. I don't think that I've run one there. Steve, how much horsepower is a ported 243 head worth on a mild 6-liter? On a mild one, I wouldn't even do it. The stock head flows pretty well. A really seriously ported one flows way over 300, so it can support 600 horsepower or more. Is this the big muscle L78? Well, Anarchy. It's a 396. It's like this one's actually a 402 because it's a 30 over, so it technically would be a 1970 version. But it's the 375 horse 396. Or if you were in 1965, it's the 425 horse one. I think there's a balance difference between the flywheels of the Gen 5 and Gen 6. There is. We have a neutral flywheel that we use that has different bolt-on weights for the Mark IV and Gen 5 and Gen 6. If you email me, I can give you all the upgrades I want to use. Well, let's start with how much power do you want to make and what motor do you have? The all of the rest of it's very easy after that. A lot of times what people get wrapped up in is little tiny things that are not that important. Nicholas, if you're going to try to make 700 wheel horsepower, a 4L60E is not going to get the job done. You're going to need probably a modified 4L80. It's nice out today, although there was a little bit of rain today. Yesterday it was really nice. Was the intake manifold the only difference between an LS6 and an LS7? No, an LS7 was a different motor, and it was not a production motor. It was never offered in a car, so it was a crate motor offered by Chevrolet. You want to see a bike motor tested on here? Don't really have the dyno set up for that. Only chassis dyno. What budget 1000cc injectors? I don't know about 1000cc stuff. Um, the Deca 80s are kind of the go-to, but above that, I don't know what people are using. There shouldn't be any buffering here. This is pretty good internet here. Mario, a lockup converter actually has a clutch in it that, like it says, it locks up. So otherwise, the converter is always kind of slipping, and on a lockup converter, it no longer slips. So it gets better mileage, which is why the factories use them. Burn, I know the 70 Chevelle SS396 with 456 gears of the blaster drive. I bet it would be. You want to make 600 horsepower LS1 with a stock stroke on an LS1 on a 5.7, and but also you want to do that on pump gas. That's not going to happen unless you have boost. Turbo Sentra, let me know what happens with your cam, man. Reloading. I don't think that there will be a problem swapping the crankshaft and the rods and the pistons from a Gen 5 into a Gen 6, as long as you use the Gen 6, because I think that both of those are one piece rear seals. I think that should be okay. Yeah, the L7 was a high compression deal. Ever consider comparing a small block and a big block for the same cubic inch? That would be cool. I think that Engine Masters did that already. Back in the day, you could buy the dealer LS7 intake in the trunk option. I don't know what that is. I've never heard that. I don't know why the LS7 intake would be any different. I don't know much about that particular intake manifold. Justin, it'd be much easier if you're going to make a crank trigger just to buy a crank trigger that's already a set tooth pattern, and then figure out an adapter to bolt that crank trigger like an MSD one. Lots of people sell them, and then just figure out a way to get that bolted to your dampener. Have you done anything with the Coyotes? Yeah, I've done lots of testing with Coyotes way, way, way back. I haven't done anything with the newer ones. What's the best NA you've seen on a stock stroke elsewhere? On a 5.7? I think we've done near 600. But it's not a good street motor though. It's a terrible street motor because you have to have valve reliefs in the pistons, and yet just so that you can put a big enough cam, and you have to have ported heads. And I think we ran a high ram and stuff on it. Does an MS3 Pro support VVT? Yeah, it did on the 4200 because we ran it on the 4200. 1983 Chevy 454. Yeah, cam and headers will definitely pick up power. I don't know about the marine motors. I don't know what they did to them to make them marine motors. Most of them are very low compression. The LS7 was not a tri-power. The tri-power was a factory offering on the 427. The LS7 was a 454 and was not offered in any factory car. Steve, have you ever posted data about what size injector works with what horsepower? Yeah, I have an injector video up that shows you how to calculate it. Ricky, the factory LS6 intake manifold was already a dual plane. It was already aluminum. So I don't know what I'll have to do some research on that and see if the LS7 intake was any different. The one cool induction system that was a dealer option was the dual quad stuff for the small blocks. How does the 8.1 take nitrous? It's fine. Just like every motor, it loves it. Richard, one tip I suggest when fitting rings is this. With the ring square up in the bore about a 1/4 inch down, shine a flashlight up from the bottom of the bore to reveal any problems. What are you trying to reveal from that? Are you trying to reveal if the ring that isn't, if there's a gap between the ring and the bore? Ever worked with a Foyt coyote? No, the ones that they used to run up at Pikes Peak. Is that the ones that you're talking about? Richard, are you doing the CFM test on the big block and the small block with the same? I don't have any of that. I don't have a big block and a small block that make the same power. You happen to have a good reference for calculating a rear end ratio? Yeah, I gave you a formula for mile an hour that will give you an idea on gearing. You're gonna have to back calculate the gearing. I don't know what transmission you have. I don't know if you have a 1-to-1. That would be a lot easier, but you just have to multiply whatever your gearing is to figure out if you're trying to figure out And Wallace Racing has this. So if you want to figure out what gear ratio to put in for, if you know the RPM limit and the gearing in the transmission, there's a Wallace Racing calculator for them. And that's Wallace Racing calculators. Let's see. You think anyone be able to regrind the cam lobes? Check with the regrinders like Schneider and Webb and those guys. They might be able to do it. Looking to buy a 2002 Trans Am V8. How many miles on the motor would you? Which is it? 2002? Is that an LT1 or is that an LS1? We James, we don't have the wrong rings anymore. We have the right rings now. What we had was, as it turns out, we this is a 4125 bore or 4124. But when the rings were ordered, the rings were ordered for a 30 over 4125. And it shouldn't have been. It should have been a 30 over 4094 or just a standard bore 4125. And so we've solved that. Did you ever mod your Ford GT? Yes, we did all the stuff on it. We did the snout upgrade and the computer change and the exhaust and that stuff on it. Pressure ratio on the stock L78 is like 11-1 or something. It's Wallace Racing, WALLACE, Wallace Racing. Yeah, Fling, I kind of thought that those were the same intake manifold, but I can't swear to. I haven't done a lot of research on the LS7 just because it's a crate motor. It's not a factory motor, so I just wasn't ever worried about knowing as much as I should about it. Reloading. What is a KF350? Oh, 350 small block. 520 horsepower from a 350 would be easy with boost or nitrous, but making 520 on a 350 again just takes a lot of RPM and lots of camshaft and compression and all the things that would make it not a good motor. The L6 came with a flat manifold to clear the Corvette hoods. It did in 71 when they put them in the Corvettes. They didn't put them in 1970, but they put them in and started in the Chevelles in 1970. And that's the one that I'm building is the Chevelle version. So I don't know if the it might be that the Chevelle manifold is not a low profile one like the Corvette one is. Ricky, I knew that the rings were wrong, but I was in make it happen mode and I had a ring grinder, so you know, that plus that is nonsense. Jonathan, I don't have any idea what those heads flow from that 3.6 liter. 100 horsepower per liter is hard to do. You have to have lots of head flow. You have to have good a good camshaft. You have to have compression, a good intake manifold. Anarchy. Who is having a difference of opinion about a good motor? Okay, let's see. We can go to live chat now because I think I'm down at the. I can't go to live chat. I can't even see live chat there. Can't even see that. How many miles would you stay away from? I don't know what motor that is. On an LS, I wouldn't be worried about any level of mileage on it. On an LT1, I wouldn't be worried so much about the mileage on the motor, but on the other things like the OptiSpark and stuff, if it has it. I don't know what year that all that started. I just there's just too many things to keep upstairs. The 350, if it is an LT1, is going to wear more than the LS stuff does. I have an L78 crate motor. L6 crate motors came with low rise manifolds also. Okay. Did they come with the Corvette manifold then? Mad Mod. I don't think you'll need to replace the your rockers. Richard, what's the biggest factory underrated? Probably the I thought that the 03 Cobra motor was underrated. Will Big Block Chevy Gen 5 heads work with a Mark IV block? I think they will with the right gasket. I don't remember what gasket you'd have to use though. I have a friend with an L7 still in the crate. West recently ran one. That's the guy. The guy bought it, and it was still in the crate from GM, and they ran it at West But I think that they ran it like with a tunnel ram or something. Thinking man, I don't know. The guys argue about that all the time between the Chevelle and the Hemi Cuda and that Buick. And I think that as much as anything, you have to look at who who did the testing and where did they do the testing. And I know that going back even through like 5-liter Mustang stuff and seeing some of the magic super pressurized optimum launch super groupie tracks that people ran stuff at and run factory runs at. I don't know. I don't, if you're looking at one of them as a tenth faster than the other or whatever, I don't know that you settle that as an absolute. Have you worked with modified Gen 6 heads? I've not. The only modifications we've done are different valve springs on them. My uncle's Monte Carlo was a number snatching L6 454. Would that have been a factory option? I don't know if the. Let's take a look and see. I don't know if the Monte Carlo got an LS6. Let's see. Monte Carlo buyer's guide. Let's see options here. It said they did come with 454s and 396s or 402s, but I don't know if they ever got the LS6. Let's see. Nor has anyone authenticated factory installation of the vaunted 450 horsepower LS6 into a Monte Carlo, though a few dealer-built examples of the 454 and 4-speed LS cars do exist. So they're saying that they don't think, and that's what I thought was going on, that they don't think that that was actually a factory option. That somebody must have put that in there. Which EFR heads for a YSI, a 210 or 220. It doesn't matter. They'll both do what you need them to do. The blower is going to determine how much power it makes. Mad Mod, how do you go 1060 with 360 wheel horsepower? Are you doing it in a 2,000-pound car? Is this my garage? This is Mark's garage. Steve, I don't know what 427 you're talking about. Have you done testing on an 853 head? What is that? That's an 850. The 853 is an LS head. I mean, an LS1 head. I've only done 241 heads, so I don't know how that. I would imagine the 853 is probably comparable. 427 small block. I don't know what power you want to make. Usually an airflow research head is the way to go if you're trying to make power. You're going to build a ZL1. It's way out of my price range. I want to build an L78, a ZL1. Somebody was saying that they ran a ZL1 at Westech here recently. One of the other customers came in and said, "Were you here when they ran that?" I said, "No," and I can't believe that Brule didn't ever even mention it to me. So I'm going to find out if that's actually true. The L78 was very cool because it was very high compression with a big camshaft. It was a 427 with aluminum head. And then the ZL1 was the aluminum block option basically for that. Although I think that they also changed the Tom, I don't think I saw it. I'll take a look and see. I haven't opened up all the boxes that are over there, but I'll let you know tomorrow. Steve, I think if you're, how much power are you trying to make? Are you trying to make all of the power that those will do? And is that the ProCharge one that you're talking about? Yeah, Tom, I'll take a look. So if it's there, I'll bring the check over to John, and then I can get that stuff sent out. Ragtop, you guys built the ZL1? Those, they are cool. What I'm looking, does anybody else out there have any? I'm looking for a set of stock unported L89 heads, the aluminum head option for the big blocks. So does anybody have any that you know they could sell for a couple $100? No, I know that they're expensive, but I would like to get a set. Steve, if you're talking about a pump gas 427, then just put. Does a 245 head, is that an offset rocker and that stuff? I wouldn't go to the trouble of that kind of stuff for a street motor. And a street motor, you're not going to be taking advantage of everything that the head has to offer anyways. You're not going to have that much camshaft in it, and you're not going to have that much compression in it. So I would pick an easy cylinder head because I think a 220 airflow head still flows 300 CFM. Was it Mitten Made? Is that what it is? Reading that right? Yeah. My uncle used to run an L78 427 over the counter motor. They were very, very popular in his 70 Chevelle at Detroit Dragway. He said it was faster than it was with an LS7 454 over the counter. It just needed different gears. Richard, how can a 396 be nosy? Noisy? What I don't know what the question is. Yeah, T. I need a set of L89 heads, or they're also the later L88 heads, the open chamber L88 heads. Is there an intake for a port injection in LV3? The guys at Brian Tooley are working on one, I think. Oh, I had a typo on the pole. I did. I can't even see the pole anymore, so I don't know what that is. Richard, is there a big enough gain for me to make my exhaust valves 35 millimeters on the SRT4 motor? The intakes are 36 millimeters right now. Burns, I'm curious why they would be concerned about the exhaust valve side. Are these things exhaust flow limited? What is that? Have you flowed the heads? Do you know what the heads flow? You know what the intake to exhaust flow relationship is? Yeah, thinking man, they didn't. GM really didn't even want to sell that in as a street motor because it did require high compression. Although the thing had enough camshaft in it that it should have been, the dynamic compression should have been down with that much cam. BNR, no, the big block's not alive yet, but the short block's done and it has heads on it, so we've made some progress. Yeah, Burns, I would on most four valve heads, exhaust flow and the intake to exhaust flow relationship usually is way more on the exhaust side than people need. Yeah, Rex, all the L88 and Z01 heads were all aluminum, and then they were different. The guy at West has a set of early closed chamber L88 heads, but the ones that I want are the open chamber ones because honestly, I think that they're better. Mitten Made. Yeah, I don't want any sort of ported head. I don't care about the power output. I just want them to be stock. Effective compression ratio is more important than dynamic. I believe effective compression ratio takes into account volumetric efficiency of the tested engine. So what is effective compression? What is a calculation for that? That's not the BMEP number, right? It's just torque relative to displacement. Yeah, T. I know that they're hard to find, and I'm probably going to need another set of closed chamber rec port heads, like a 219 or something, for the 454, because I don't want to take the heads off of the off of the 396. Those are pulled in 75%. I just took a bunch of plenums over to measure the port spacing um, compared to the Dodge, because obviously we have to do a Super Ritchie manifold. I got a couple more to try though, but I haven't found anything that matches up yet. I think it means mechanical versus dynamic compression. He said not dynamic though, so I don't know. More air ingested. I agree. Does want 140% VE. He usually falls at the torque peak. That's where BMEP will be highest. This this assembly, this throw this thing together assembly is taking a lot of days. This is a lot, but it'll be cool when it's all done. Mad Mod, the square under square over square thing is I think is a phrase. They're phrases given to engines that have those things. I think when people pick those, they pick them for specific applications. So a lot of times they want more stroke. Sometimes for emissions related motors. Most of the racing motors are going to be by design the short stroke and bigger bores, primarily so that they can put lots of head flow and make lots of power that way. Rex, was that for me? I did make money in, well, I'm paper trading, so I'm not really making money. But it was another update today for I was able to get on in the morning and went from down to up, so it's good. I have an oval port, cast iron, high rise, big block Chevy intake manifold. Came off of a 402, the spread bore intake. So it's a Q-jet intake manifold. What's the best intake for an 09 versus a hatch? 1.8, the Super Ritchie one. There's only one of those in existence. Richard, I have 335 at 400 and exhaust is 347 at 400. So it has more exhaust flow than intake? I wouldn't worry about the exhaust size then. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about exhaust flow. I would work on intake flow. When you tested cheap Chinese heads on small block Chevy, are you going through them with a valve job and different parts or just straight out of the box? The ones that I tested, we just tested out of the box. Sometimes we put springs in them just so that they would run, but usually they're the way that they come so that we could demonstrate what they do. But if I'm going to run them, I was going to put them in a car, I would definitely upgrade stuff. Burns, don't do it because other guys are doing it. That's not a good way to go racing. You're a sharp guy. You should do what you think is right. Richard, does an aluminum block allow for more compression on pump gas? I think people used to talk about that. I don't think that that's the case anymore. The blueprint stuff seems to be pretty good, and like the Promax stuff seems to be good. That there are good, and you can't generalize all of the ones from this one are bad and all the ones from this one are bad. As far as point of origin, um, there are some good there's lots of good stuff that I've used from Speedmaster. There are also things that I wouldn't use. So, it's an individual thing. Burns, I don't know why they're doing that. Somebody may have told them, hey, you need more exhaust flow for a turbo motor, and I don't understand that. Troy, I don't know about fuel pumps very much. I don't do a lot of stuff on the street. All of our stuff is on the dyno, and we have a gigantic fuel pump on the dyno. But you're going to do multiple, 450s or 500s or something probably for that. When you add ring gap, do you get blow by? No. You want Tricklo to build a Coyote motor? That would be the last thing that I would do. It's already a great motor, and ported, it's even better. So I don't know if that they're going to do that. The tooling for and making a development for a 4-valve motor, I think it's got to be pretty high. Do you think the Speedmaster bottom end kits are decent? All the ones that I've tried, all the rods were good, and the cranks and stuff all seemed like they were pretty good. But I have them all checked though before we put them together. Burns, can you weld that head up and raise the port or something that might help it? Can you put more camshaft in it? You guys ever use DSS racing pistons? I think we have. Rex, you got 3 tickets in one day? That's good. I thought I was doing good when I had 2. Richards Diesel. Yeah, the difference between an iron block and aluminum LS block is 100 pounds. Brian Toohey recently posted a back-to-back thing where they weighed them. On a tight budget, what do you think about World Sportsman 2 heads? I don't know that I've ever run those. And if I was doing stuff on a budget, I think I would get Vortec heads. In the past, they want exhaust to intake flow relationship with the cylinder heads to be 90 to 95%. So you want the exhaust flowing 95% of the intake? I've never heard that. 75 usually is the number. And even that, like I said, I can tell you this, that a pro stock motor, the exhaust flow isn't 75% of the intake. And yet, a pro stock motor works pretty good. Or 85 or whatever the number is. You ever flow test a cylinder head with an intake manifold attached? I have in the past. It's just kind of a pain. 90 to 95%. Oh, for turbos. Increase the big block Chevy closed chamber intake valve. Yeah, we're not going to go up in size on that. Two more minutes. Yeah, it's just an option out and all that stuff. Richard, I set my summit spring height micrometer. How tight do you tighten? You, you don't grab it with channel locks and tighten it. You just tighten it with your finger. Just tighten and get it there. It should stop and not move anymore. It doesn't have to be real tight. And you don't, if you're looking for 1 or 2 thousandths, you're looking too closely. Yeah, Jonathan, that's like the Honda head and the VW head that we did. Having that thing cast in means the exhaust doesn't flow very well, but it didn't stop us from. It's going to stop you from making NA power. it's That's going to hurt you. It doesn't stop us from making turbo power, but it definitely stops you from making NA power because the individual ports flow differently. David, the wiring harness will be very similar for the 8.1. The firing order is the same. They use the same kind of coil packs and stuff. We use an LS harness on the 8.1 when we run it on the dyno. Hot mess. You have 9cc domes. 8 valve. I have to go back and look at the when we ran the what did we do that on the Volkswagen? Yeah, I'm gonna run the. I was gonna run the 8.1 when I was down here because I have a cam swap that we were gonna do on it, but I don't know now. We're running out of time. I didn't think that this L78 would take this long. I don't have any updates on the GLH. It's running, and hopefully we'll be on the dyno again before too long. We're gonna close out our poll. Got to get back to work. That's the Chevy Performance Dual Plane. I think I've run for a small block Chevy. Is that the one you're talking about? And because I have the Dart manifold for the 8.1 also that I'm loaning to my buddy Andy. And on that note, it's time to go. Firing order. This is from Freiburger. Thumbs up for Freiburger. Thank you all for showing up. I will be back tomorrow.